Pre-order my upcoming novel, American Evil, in the description below. So, with the release of Another Crab's Treasure, it seems like Nintendo Switch has an indie darling on its hands. I haven't seen a lot of gameplay from it, but it seems like a lot of people I know are very enthusiastic about the game and want to support it. And I myself wasn't interested in it when I saw it, but something about it has really caught my attention, right? Something about it has really made me think. And I've talked about this before, but I do think it bears repeating now, before I even played the game. Like, isn't it interesting how we're getting so many Souls-like clones from these indie developers that are objectively better than the real thing, right? Sultan Sanctuary was better, Hollow Knight was better, and I'm sure Another Crab's Treasure is better, right? The reality is, unlike Zelda, which is so complex and involved that it's very difficult for people to copycat it, Dark Souls is relatively simple, right? Dark Souls is very basic, where you have basic enemies just standing around waiting for you, and then they'll come at you and they'll attack you with their one or two attacks, right? That's Dark Souls, right? The enemy models aren't good, the AI isn't good, the level design isn't good, the structure isn't good, the pacing isn't good. Dark Souls is just a mess, fundamentally. So it isn't hard to take what people like about Dark Souls, right, and apply it to other better games, right? Sultan Sanctuary is a really good example where it is a 2D action Dark Souls like, a Metroidvania essentially that has better combat, better bosses, better mechanics than Dark Souls, in spite of being essentially the same thing, structure wise and tone wise. Sultan Sanctuary really builds off the Dark Souls in a really compelling, interesting way. And then, of course, you have Hollow Knight, which takes a lot of the concepts from Dark Souls and applies it to a more Metroidvania concept, which makes it better, in general, right? The character balancing is better, the level up system is better, the game is more intuitive, it's more fun to play, right? It has a more interesting plot, characters, right? Hollow Knight is objectively better than Dark Souls. And Another Crab's Treasure, although I have not played it, is really interesting to me because by the looks of it, the game has a bright, colorful aesthetic. It has, unique characters, a unique setting, unique gameplay. The way it looks is that it is very different from Dark Souls while still retaining the same amount of the same general gameplay loop. So, what are the chances that that game is better than Dark Souls as well, right? My point is, I don't think it's I think considering the sheer amount of indie games we've gotten, imitating Dark Souls, I don't think it's impossible to say that it's not going to be too much longer until we get an indie studio that makes better Dark Souls games than FromSoft, right? I don't think it's that far away because we're already kind of seeing the beginnings of that. We're seeing people do new and interesting things with the idea, things that FromSoft would never be able to think of, right? Would they be able to come up with the crab thing? No. Would they be able to come up with the Hollow Knight thing? No. Would they be able to come up with Sultan Sanctuary? No. Right? They cannot, they don't have the skill or the talent to innovate on their own idea. All they can do is just do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again while other studios do it better on Nintendo hardware, right? That is, I think, the inevitable fate of Dark Souls is that it's just going to be slowly eclipsed by all the games that are copycatting it to the point where I hope we finally come up with a better name for the genre than Souls-like. Come on, bro. It's it's an action RPG. Come up with a better term. It's just I'm um just not a fan of the terminology. Dark Souls, I think, has kind of proven itself to not all be that innovative or all that long lasting. Who do you know who even remembers the original Dark Souls at this point? Right, we are at that point now where I think the game is like slowly being forgotten by the masses, which is a really interesting thing to see happen, considering just how long people spent like shilling it as like this innovative and innovator in game design. But yeah, my point is, I think there are better games than Souls out there already, right? Like we don't even have to like bring in like Tears of the Kingdom to prove that, right? Like I don't even have to talk about Breath of the Wild, right? I don't have to talk about like all the better Nintendo games, right? Like there are better games from smaller studios than FromSoft that are doing the same thing that they're doing, but better. And I do hope that eventually gamers begin to understand and appreciate that fact.